Good morning, everyone. I hope you are doing well at your places. So, we are back with the last part of the chapter. We are discussing the enemy from vistas. So, we were on page number 40, the last paragraph of page number 40. So, let's start. The general shook his head. I had rather not be the test case, he said. He felt suddenly weak and overwhelmed with the cares of his life as an official in times such as these when repeated victory brought great responsibility all over the South Pacific. It is very unfortunate that this man should have washed up on your doorstep, he said irritably. I feel it so myself, Sadao said gently. It would be best if he could be quietly killed, the general said. Not by you, but by someone who does not know him. I have my own private assassins. Suppose I send two of them to your house tonight, or better, any night. You need know nothing about it. It is now warm. What would be more natural than that you should leave the outer partition of the white man's room open to the garden while he sleeps? Certainly, it would be very natural. Sadao agreed. In fact, it is so left open every night. Good, the general said, yawning. They are very capable assassins. They make no noise and they know the trick of inward bleeding. If you know, if you like, I can even have them remove the body. Sadao considered. That perhaps would be best. Excellency, he agreed, thinking of Hannah. He left the general's presence then and went home, thinking over the plan. In this way, the whole thing would be taken out of his hands. He would tell Hannah nothing, since she would be timid at the idea of assassins in the house. And yet, certainly, such persons were essential in all absolute states such as Japan was. How else could rulers deal with those who oppose them? He refused to allow anything but reasons to be the atmosphere of his mind as he went into the room where the American was in bed. But as he opened the door, to his surprise he found the young man out of bed and preparing to go into the garden. "What is this?" he exclaimed. "Who gave you permission to leave your room?" "I am not used to waiting for permissions," Tom said gaily. "Gosh, I feel pretty good again, but will the muscles on this side always feel stiff?" "Is it so?" Sadao inquired, surprised. He forgot all else. "Now I thought I had provided against that," he murmured. He lifted the edge of the man's shirt and gazed at the healing scar. "Massage may do it," he said. "If exercise does not, it won't bother me much," the young man said. His young face was gaunt under the stubbly blond beard. "Say, doctor, I have got something I want to say to you. If I had not met a Jap like you, well, I wouldn't be alive today. I know that." Sadao bowed, but he could not speak. "Sure, I know that," Tom went on warmly. His big, thin hands gripping a chair were white at the knuckles. "I guess if all the Japs were like you, there wouldn't have been a war." "Perhaps," Sadao said with difficulty, "and now I think you had better go back to bed." He helped the boy back into bed and then bowed. "Good night," he said. Sadao slept badly that night. Time and time again he woke, thinking he heard the rustling of footsteps, the sounds of a twig broken or a stone displaced in the garden, a noise such as men might make who carried a burden. The next morning he made the excuse to go first into the guest room. If the American were gone, He then could simply tell Hannah that so the general had directed. But when he opened the door, he saw at once that there on the pillow was the shaggy blonde head. He could hear the peaceful breathing of sleep, and he closed the door again quietly. He is asleep, he told Hannah. He is almost well to sleep like that. Well, shall we do with him? Hannah whispered her old refrain. Sadao shook his head. I must decide in a day or two, he promised. But certainly, he thought the second night must be the night. There rose a wind that night, and he listened to the sounds of bending bows and whistling partitions. Hannah woke too. Ought we not to go to Ought we not to go and close the sick man's partition? She asked. No, Sadao said. He is able now to do it for himself. But the next morning the American was still there. Then the third night, of course, must be the night. The wind changed to quiet rain, and the garden was full of the sound of dripping eaves and running springs. Sadao slept a little better, but he woke at the sound of crash and leaped to his feet. What was that? Hannah cried. The baby woke at her voice and began to wail. I must go and see. But he held her and would not let her move. Sadao, she cried, what is the matter with you? Don't go. He muttered, don't go. His terror infected her and she stood breathless, waiting. There was only silence. Together they crept back into the bed, the baby between them. Yet when he opened the door of the guest room in the morning, there was the young man. He was very gay and had already washed and was now on his feet. He had asked for a razor yesterday and had shaved himself, and today there was a faint color in his cheeks. I am well, he said joyously. Sadao drew his kimono round his weary body. He could not, he decided suddenly, go through another night. It was not that he cared for this young man's life. No, simply it was not worth the strain. You are well, Sadao agreed. He lowered his voice. You are so well that I think if I put my boat on the shore tonight with food and extra clothing in it, you might be able to row to that little island not far from the coast. It is so near the coast that it has not been worth fortifying. Nobody lives on it, because in storms it is submerged. But this is not the season of storm. You could live there until you saw a Korean fishing boat pass by. They pass quiet near the island because the water is many fathoms deep there. The young man stared at him, slowly comprehending. Do I have to? He asked. I think so, Sadao said gently. You understand, it is not hidden that you are here. The young man nodded in perfect comprehension. Okay, he said simply. Sadao did not see him again until evening. As soon as it was dark, he had dragged a stout boat down to the shore, and in it he put food and bottled water that he had brought secretly during the day, as well as 2 quilts he had bought at a pawn shop. The boat he tied to a post in the water, for the tide was high. There was no moon, and he worked without a flashlight. When he came to the house, he entered as though he was just came back from his work, and so Hannah knew nothing. Yumi was here today, she said as she served his supper. Though she was so modern, still she did not eat with him. Yumi cried over the baby. She went on with a sigh. She misses him so. The servants will come back as soon as the foreigner is gone, Sadao said. He went into the guest room that night before he went to bed himself and checked carefully the American's temperature, the state of wound, and his heart and pulse. The pulse was irregular, but that was perhaps because of excitement. The young man's pale lips were pressed together and his eyes burned. Only the scars on his neck were read. I realize you are saving my life again, he told Sadao. Not at all, Sadao said. It is only inconvenient to have you here any longer. He had hesitated a good deal about giving the man a flashlight, but he had decided to give it to him after all. It was a small one, his own, which he used at night when he was called. If your food runs out before you catch a boat, he said, signal me 2 flashes at the same instant the sun drops over the horizon. Do not signal in darkness, for it will be seen. If you are all right but still there, signal me once. You will find fresh fish easy to catch, but you must eat them raw. A fire would be seen. Okay, the young man breathed. He was dressed now in the Japanese clothes which Sadao had given him, and at the last moment Sadao wrapped a black cloth about his blond head. Now, Sadao said, the young American, without a word, shook Sadao's hand warmly and then walked quite well across the floor and down the step into the darkness of the garden. Once, twice. Sadao saw his light flash to find his way, but that would not be suspected. He waited until from the shore there was one more flash. Then he closed the partition. That night he slept. You say the man escaped. The general asked faintly. He had been operated upon a week before, an emergency operation to which Sadao had been called in the night. For 12 hours, Sadao had not been sure the general would live. The gallbladder was much involved. Then the old man had begun to breathe deeply again and to demand food. Sadao had not been able to ask about the assassins. So far as he knew, they had never come. The servants had returned and Yumi had cleaned the guest room thoroughly and had burned sulfur in it to get the white man's smell out of it. Nobody said anything. Only the gardener was cross because he had got the behind with his chrysanthemums. But after a week, Sadao felt the general was well enough to be spoken to about the prisoner. Yes, Excellency, he escaped, Sadao now said. He coughed, signifying that he had not said all he might have said, but was unwilling to disturb the general further. But the old man opened his eyes suddenly. That prisoner? He said, with some energy. Did I not promise you I would kill him for you? You did, Excellency, Sadao said. Well, well, the old man said in a tone of amazement. So I did, but you see, I was suffering a good deal. The truth is, I thought of nothing but myself. In short, I forgot my promise to you. I wondered, Your Excellency, Sadao murmured. It was certainly very careless of me, the general said, but you understand it was not lack of patriotism or dereliction of duty. But you understand it was not lack of patriotism or dereliction of duty. He looked anxiously at his doctor. If the matter should come out, you would understand that, wouldn't you? Certainly, Your Excellency, Sadao said. He suddenly comprehended that the general was in the palm of his hand and that as a consequence he himself was perfectly safe. I can swear to you your loyalty, Excellency, he said to the old general, and to your zeal against the enemy. You are a good man, the general murmured and closed his eyes. You will be. But Sadao, searching the spot of black in the twilighted sea that night, had his reward. There was no prick of light in the dusk. No one was on the island. His prisoners was gone, safe, doubtless, for he had warned him to wait only for a Korean fishing boat. He stood for a moment on the veranda, gazing out to the sea from where the young man had come that other night. And also And into his mind, although without reason, there came other white faces he had known. The professor at whose house he had met Hannah, a dull man, and his wife had been a silly, talkative woman. In spite of her wish to be kind, he remembered his old teacher of anatomy who had been so insistent on mercy with the knife. And then he remembered the face of his fat and slatternly landlady. He had had great difficulty in finding a place to live in America because he was a Japanese. The Americans were full of prejudice and it had been bitter to live in it, knowing himself their superior. How he has despised the ignorant and dirty old woman who had at last consented to house him in her miserable home. He had once tried to be grateful to her because she had in his last year nursed him through influenza, but it was difficult, for she was no less repulsive to him in her kindness. Now he remembered the youthful, haggard face of his prisoner, white and repulsive. Strange, he thought. I wonder why I could not kill him. So, students, this is the end of our chapter, The Enemy. Now, what happened till here? Sadao waited for 3 nights. No assassins arrived, as the general promised Sadao that he will send assassins to kill the American. But Sadao waited for 3 nights. No assassin arrived. The American was getting better. In spite of himself, Sadao was helping him to recover. The American thanked Sadao for saving his life, but Sadao did not want to talk about this. Sadao found it difficult to keep the American in his house any longer. He was tired of waiting for the assassins to come and do away with him, so he decided to help him to escape. Now, what Sadao had decided? Sadao decided that the assassins were not coming, so he decided that he would help the American to escape. Sadao provided him with his boat. He put food, water, and quills in the boat, which he bought in the noontime. He also gave the American his flashlight. There was an uninhabited island very close to the shore. He told the American to sail to the island. There he could live till he found a Korean fishing boat pass by the island. Then he could seek help and escape to freedom. Now Sadao suggested him to stay on an island which was not far away from the place of Sadao, and he asked him to wait for a ship where he can go home safely and get freedom. He warned the American not to make any fire. He could easily catch fish and eat it raw. Now what Sadao suggested him? Sadao suggested him that do not burn, because if you catch fire, if you want to catch fish, go do it and eat it raw, because if you make any fire, you will be caught easily. It was a moonless night. The American sailed away to the island. Now what happened? Sadao helped the American to escape to the island. Now, because General was also ill and Sadao was supposed to visit him, Sadao had been once again called in. He operated on the General. When the General was better, Sadao told him that the American prisoner had escaped. Then the General recalled that he had failed to send the assassins to kill the American. He told Sadao that he had forgotten to keep his promise. Now, for the operation, Sadao had visited to General's place, and here he told to the General that American had escaped. Now then the General reminds, he recalls that I forgot to send assassins to your place to kill the American. He told Sadao that he had forgotten to keep his promise, but he assured him that it was neither because of his lack of patriotism nor because of dereliction of duty. He was simply absorbed in his own affairs, that he was little occupied, he was not well, which is why he was unable to send the assassins to his place. Sadao realized that he was safer than ever before. The General was in the palm of his hand, but he assured the General that he would never remain loyal to him. Now what happened? General was in the palm of his hand. Sadao was thinking, and the General that he would ever remain loyal to him, that he will always remain loyal to him. As the American had left, all the servants returned. Once again, things were as usual. Things were back to normal. As the American had gone, all the servants, be it Yumi or the gardener, all returned to Sadao's place. Sadao thought of the Americans he had known. Now Sadao is thinking of all the Americans he had known. He hated them all. He hated the soldier he had saved and helped to escape. Now Sadao is thinking about the soldier whom he had saved and even helped him to escape. But he did not understand why he could not kill him. Now at last what is happening, that after doing all the work, Sadao is thinking that why could not I kill him? Now this thought is there in his head. So student, this is the end of our chapter, The Enemy. I hope you would have understand this chapter, and once again at the end of the video I would again like to say, read this chapter by your own also, and we'll be doing the question answer of this. Alright? So utilize your time, take care, have a good day. We'll meet in the next video.